Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance and money management.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast. Hello, mate. How are you?
Mate, can you believe it's already February and the property market is open for business?
Yeah, it's a
but
busy
did it
month.
actually close? Did it actually close? All of those transactions going on in the regions and the beachside areas and, you know, those holiday locations. The market is the market, which is the market, mate, and it's pretty warm out there.
Yeah, I'm excited about February though, because January doesn't really give you too much insight. No. It's when the listings start to happen in February where it's lots of fun.
It's when the big market's open for business, Bryce. It's when the big market's open for business.
Well, a lot of agents typically go away until Australia Day, but you know, in a pandemic world, some of them stuck around and got some work done. Others still kept their holidays in check, but it's not until February until we really find out. But
we're getting serious about it now. It's all
started strong though.
Yeah, it is. It's a property show today. It's a property show, but we've got a little bit to thank people for.
Yeah, we've got a very special guest today. But before we get there, we had an amazing summer series, been lots of really awesome stories, great feedback. And the mission of the summer series is because throughout the year, our goal is to provide the very best frameworks, the very best guests, the very best insights as it is to property investing. But as people change gears over summer, and they go camping and fishing and having relaxing and all those, the idea is just to plant in their mind some seeds of success of people who have actually implemented the stuff that we talk about through the year. So we're really proud of what we get to achieve through our guests via the summer series. And I just want to shout out, Ben, I want to say thanks to Dee, Michael, Amy, Amber and Dan, Brad, Matt, Ricky, Marina, Bianca and Steve. They were our guests. They were our wonderful guests. And they were the very, very brave souls who came on, opened up their backstories for everyone to have a listen. And my hope, and I know it's your hope, Ben, is that people go, oh, I'm going to take that little bit. I'm going to take that little bit. I'm going to take that little bit and bring it together, form a habit so that 2022 is the best year you've ever had when it comes to money management foundations. Because what we do know, Ben, is if you get the money management foundations right, the world is your oyster because you trap surplus. And then all of a sudden you got a choice. You go, do I spend it on restaurants? Do I spend it on lifestyle now? Or do I spend it on the future? Or do I spend it on a little bit of both, Ben?
A, B, C, D, Bryce, cash flow management. You get in control of it. You get the borrowings and leverage right through good cash flow management. You do great asset selection and you go off and buy properties and put some defense around it. That's what you do. Hey, you know what's been interesting about the last couple of years that we've run the summer series is we get a bit of reach out through our, through our onlines there at the Property Couch. And there's a lot of people who have reached out in the past who have said, can you help me just sort of set up the Money Smart system? Like I've got the book. It's, I can sort of understand it, but I wouldn't mind someone holding my hand in being able to set that up. Well, this year, Bryce, I've worked in with the team and Joel and I are going to help people set up their Money Smarts system. So here's the deal, right? It's going to be
personally, you're going to do everyone in Australia. Oh, that's good.
I'm not going to do everyone. No,
that's a good offer.
No, I'm not. But I will make a commitment that there will be people who will have me as their advisor in terms of helping them set up their Money Smart system. Now, to learn more, right? And this is just to get an idea of what's going on. Here's what I'm proposing I'm going to do. Right. I'm going to do a 15-minute little mini check-in help up in terms of webinar. So anyone who registers to learn more about getting Money Smarts set up help, all they need to do is go to thepropertycouch.com.au/Money Smarts help. That's all they need to do. And they can register their interest there. And what's going to happen is I'm going to have a 15-minute chat about it, explaining basically what we can do for them. And if they like that story, there's going to be some people that Joel and I are going to help. And I'm personally, Bryce, just so you know, I'm actually going to get back on the tools and I'm going to help some people set up their Money Smart system on the platform. So I can't wait to get back on the tools to help some of those people organize their money, get in control of their money, and then put that money to work, Bryce.
That's a good idea. thepropertycouch.com.au/money smarts help. Go there, leave your details. Ben will have an opportunity to reach out to you in the very near future so that you can see how to get access to that 15 minutes. And that's
not Money Smart, it's Money Smarts with an S, just
S.
so people can make sure that they get the URL right.
Yeah, we might even ask the Stig if she can get both URLs and point to that one just in case.
Just in case. That's a good idea. So if you're interested in, getting some, basically a handheld to making sure you set it up right. That's the feedback we got, Bryce. We got, look, I think I've got it right, but I just want to double check, or I want to do this, or can you hold my hand so I make sure that I'm setting it up right the first time? Well, because we do see some people have a go at it and then there's maybe a little bit of overwhelm in it. So we're going to be there to hold their hands to basically get them set up so they can get set up for success.
Building the habits, the hard bit, because they can listen to those stories, Ben, and then they can see, if you listen to people who've actually implemented it down the track, it's all great. It's just that little bridge at the beginning. That's where, if you're James Clear, that's where the bit is. You've got to build that bridge for the habit.
Yeah.
And then the habit will do the time will do the work once you got the habit in place.
Beautiful.
Very good. Thanks again, crew. We loved every bit of it. We thank you for coming on.
Yes, thank you.
Here's my annual shout out, Ben.
Ooh.
So if you heard those stories, and you think, well, I actually want to be one of those stories where I want to spend all of 2022 getting my stuff all together, so that then you can come on and share either through our winter series or through our summer series, your transformational story, because that is the foundation. That is how you do it. You get in control of your cash flow. Then you can invest in property. Then you get lifestyle design. And that's the whole nirvana. It's not about he who dies with the most property wins. It's he who has the best life wins. And that comes from lifestyle design, which is different for everyone. That's something you can do. Hey, we got a big year ahead on the Property Couch, Ben. We are going to lift the bar. We're going to get the very best guests in this entire country on the Property Couch to give insights to our community. So I'm looking forward to that. Hey, once a year, Ben, we make an offer to our community.
Yes.
So we put a course together. We call it Start and Build, and we offer it at a very reduced price once a year. And to take a new intake or enrollment of students, so that we can see how many people we can help. So that's coming up, right? So later this month. And so what I want to do today is I just want to read out a review that we've got on iTunes. This was from Mum of 5 Grown-Ups. And it says this: love the summer series. I enjoy this podcast, but especially the chats with regular people winning with their money stories. The variety and the authenticity is great. So I like that. I wanted to just reinforce that. So what we want you to do, Mum of 5 Grown-Ups, is reach out to us any way you like: socials, info at the Property Couch, Telegram, fax, whatever you want to do. We're going to give you a copy of the Start and Build course, which is free to this person, just to say thanks for doing that. Now, what I want to do, Ben, is between now and next week, I'm going to give away more copies next week for free. Beautiful. So all you need to do is you need to go into the iTunes and leave us a review. Ideally 5 stars, but if it's 1, so we take the feedback on board.
And you make us laugh, or
get our attention.
5 stars.
Get our attention. But we're going to read out a few reviews next week, and we're going to give out free copies of the Start and Build course. Over 12 hours worth of video content. We walk you through how to do a 1K, 2K, and 3K per week passive income, what you need to do, and then all of the foundational principles that you need to know that are evergreen, that work in any market. So stay tuned for that. Check it out. All right, my mindset minute theme today, Ben. You know I love James Clear. I know you love James Clear. We've had James Clear on. We love his book. Listen to this one, and I want the little clink at the end of it. But the bad days are more important than the good days, Ben. If you write or exercise or meditate or cook when you don't feel like it, here's the kicker, then you maintain the habit. And if you maintain the habit, then all you need is time. Let that land. If you maintain the habit, then all you need is time, because these little incremental bits that happen once you keep the habit alive, time does the magic work, Ben. And the reason I brought that up is because, sure, it relates to money management. If you get those little habits right, Ben, all you need is time. Lifestyle design is yours as a result of those incremental habits, even when things get hard. So James Clear, thank you for that. Wonderful wisdom, wonderful insights. Hopefully that helps you as we go throughout the week. But Ben, we're excited. We've got a very special guest today, haven't we?
Very special guest, a return guest, one of our favorites. I mean, everyone's a favorite, right? But there's always this time of the year, everyone's interested in where the property market is going. Well, we just went to the top and got one of the leading experts in Australia to look after us in terms of there's a little clue, what her views are.
Good hit, Ben. Let's cut to that interview straight away. There will be no surprises when you hear. Let's cut to our very special guest today. All right, Ben, we've got a very special guest today. It is a returning guest who is very familiar to anyone who's been in our community for some time. But if you are listening to us for the first time, we are chatting with Nerida Conisbee. She is the Chief Economist at Ray White. She's a highly regarded economist with a specific expertise in residential and commercial property. She is currently the most quoted property commentator in Australia, the third most quoted economist, and sought after public speaker, writer, and columnist. Welcome back to the Property Couch, Nerida. Good to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure.
It's a pleasure having you on always. And how was your summer break? Did you get some time off with the family? It was a hectic end of the year for you.
Yeah, look, it was a bit hectic. I did. I came down to Melbourne for a week. We're based in Sydney, and spent a lot of time catching up with everyone, and then went back to Sydney and had 2 weeks just hanging out at the beach and relaxing. So it was a good break. Didn't go anywhere exciting, but it was fun.
Nice.
Well, you look very tanned. You can't see that on a podcast, but we can see you, which is great. But hey, look, what are your reflections on a 2021 property market that saw all major markets at a headline level greater than 10%, and quite a number of them in high 20%. So rising tide lifts all ships. Haven't seen that since the 80s. What was your reflections on last year?
Yeah, I mean, it was incredible. I mean, Australian house prices have risen 30% since the start of the pandemic. It's gone in exactly the opposite direction to what are the early predictions of what people expected to happen. Sydney has jumped by nearly 50%, heading to a $1.5 million median. And that's not surprising. You know, Sydney does often grow a little bit faster than the rest of Australia. I think what was most surprising was regional. It was Canberra. It was, now Brisbane, southeast Queensland is really taking off. So it's been this really big mix in terms of what's been happening. And a lot of it has evolved or did evolve over 2021.
Now, we know it's a demand supply story. It always is at this time. What are you seeing in your data that talks to this idea of the second purchase as that lifestyle property because of the pandemic, or those people who are moving, from their original sort of city locations into the regions that did see effectively the regions outperform the capital cities in 2021, Nerida?
Yeah, look, it was quite incredible. I mean, we did see the biggest movement of people out of capital cities to regional Australia ever recorded, which, governments have been trying to do it for 50 years probably, and then the pandemic happened and everyone spread out. So it was a good outcome. I think a lot of regional areas are incredibly livable, and the way that we changed in terms of the way we work was, ultimately good news. In terms of what did well, I mean, we did see coastal areas do really well in Victoria. I mean, Mornington Peninsula is not technically a regional area, but, that was the top performer in Melbourne. Yep. We're now seeing Geelong pricing looking very similar to Melbourne pricing. It's similar to the Illawarra. Illawarra pricing is looking very Sydney-like. And then, of course, there was this northern shift that took place and seems to still be taking place, that there's been a lot of movement of people out of Melbourne, out of Sydney, heading up north, whether that's northern New South Wales or whether it's southeast Queensland. And that seems to be having quite a lasting effect on the market. On one hand, interest rates are giving people the jitters, particularly in Sydney at the moment. But if either of you have been to Brisbane lately, it's got a very different feel to it at the moment. And, it's certainly being reflected in rental growth and also being reflected in pricing at the moment.
One of the team sent me a text message. He lives on the Gold Coast, and there was a property in Miami, 1.998 million 12 months ago. And then it sold for, I think, 3.738. 12 months later, nothing else done. So almost doubling. So there is some craziness happening there. But do you see that? What is your, if we go specifically to Queensland, everyone seems to be chasing that market. It had been one of those markets that this time each year for the last 3 or 4 years, we go, is this the year? Is this the year? And now all of a sudden it's just this train that's running away. And it's an incredibly hot market, isn't it?
It's incredibly hot. I mean, Sunshine Coast median has now outpaced Melbourne. Richmond Tweed has outpaced Melbourne. Gold Coast possibly will get there in the coming months. And Gold Coast is about to hit a $1 million median, which, you know, even 12 months ago seemed highly unlikely. Brisbane's now got $2 million suburbs, Tenerife and New Farm, places like Ascot are, you know, starting to get there. But yeah, you're right. You know, I think one of the things with Brisbane is that it has always been pretty affordable, and, you know, very, very expensive properties were quite unusual. But now, particularly at the second half, or the last quarter of 2021, we certainly saw an acceleration of pricing, which doesn't look like it's slowing at this point. You know, I think although Melbourne and Sydney were starting to see a little bit more hesitancy amongst buyers, in particular, days on market, for example, are really increasing. We're not really seeing that in Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast, Brisbane just yet. So whether it's a delay, you know, people often talk about smaller markets having a bit of a delay from the bigger cities, or whether this is just evidence of this shift of population that's taking place. And as we roll into the Olympics, it's, you know, potentially something that's here to stay.
So Nerida, it's an interesting story. I had to pick a board meeting last night, and we've got 3 of our national members located in Queensland, in Brisbane area there. And I asked them sort of, what's the initial sort of start of the year looking like? And they're saying, yep, open homes have got big crowds. You know, auctions are now becoming more prevalent than they've ever been before in that particular market. So it says to us that the underlying demand is still there. One of them talked about a purchase that they've made recently in one of the regions. And so that is probably the next question. Some of the perennial underperformers from a growth point of view have probably been areas like Townsville and even sort of Cairns to a lesser extent, but where their yields are incredible, their vacancy rates are unbelievably low. Is this, you know, open? We saw obviously yesterday the federal government announced the opening of the borders for international tourists to come in there. That's going to be a boon for Cairns. So have you got any views on those sort of far north Queensland markets?
Yeah, I mean, outside of southeast Queensland, you're right, it has been quite mixed, and Townsville in particular just has taken ages to come off. You know, just sat there kind of lagging for much of last year, and certainly the year before. Yeah, you're right. You know, international borders reopening is such fantastic news for the Australian economy. We know it'll be an inflow of foreign students, for example. It's going to help markets like, you know, Melbourne do a lot better. It's certainly going to help tourism areas such as Cairns, and that will really help things out. Also rental markets, you know, I think rents have actually grown pretty strongly, which is surprising given we haven't really had much population growth, but you know, rents will really see pressure next year or this year. So Northern Queensland, you know, I think the areas that have high exposure to mining seem to be doing pretty well, you know, particularly gas. You know, we know that there's a global gas shortage at the moment. It is helping the Queensland economy in general. But, you know, there are options around Australia which are sitting at the bottom at the moment. And if you have a look at places like Townsville, they're still pretty cheap. And it's another example would be Melbourne CBD apartments. You know, they're cheap. So, you know, people love to follow. I mean, you know, we all do. We love to follow the crowd, and we love to follow, you know, what's doing well at the moment. But fundamentally, buying at the bottom of the market in markets that are fundamentally struggling is, you know, if you've got the money and the guts, I guess, to invest in those areas, they're definitely worth a look.
You gave me a bit of a clue around the unit story, right? This is one of the largest disparities we've ever seen between house prices and unit prices. Do you see that disparity continuing throughout the course of 2022, or are you going to start seeing, as you just highlighted, around cheap Melbourne inner city apartments and potentially the arrival of international students, and already in where the vacancy rates is definitely coming down, which I was surprised about too for Melbourne CBD area? What's your view more generally around that disparity between units and house prices for 2022?
Has come under 2 problems. The first has been investors didn't come back into the market until a bit later, you know, so we really had a lot of first home buyers out there, so they were really helping things. So investors are back, and we know the majority of apartments in Australia are owned by investors, and so that will certainly help. And the other problem has been is that rental returns have been terrible. You know, rents in Melbourne CBD have dropped, I don't know, they've dropped 20% in 12 months. They've probably dropped 30, potentially 40% in over a 2-year time period. So that will turn around. You know, we can see, as you said, you know, the vacancy rates coming down, foreign students are returning. We haven't seen a construction cycle in the same way in the apartment market as we've seen in the new house market. So, you know, there will be, I guess, a bit of a shortage in some locations. Brisbane's, again, a really good example here, because Brisbane hasn't really built much since, I don't know, when did their construction cycle shut down? 2017, probably.
Yeah, 16, 17. Yep.
Yeah. So, you know, I think that will really help things out a little bit in terms of what happens to rents. And as a result, you know, once rental growth starts off, it does become far more attractive. The other thing with Brisbane, sorry, I won't talk the whole time about Brisbane, is how that area is changing in terms of acceptability of apartments. And I think this is the thing with Sydney and Melbourne. People are kind of used to living in apartments in both of those cities because they are so expensive. Brisbane, people haven't been used to it, but there does seem to be, I guess, a growing acceptance, and particularly amongst first home buyers who, you know, are now getting priced out of, you know, what were affordable suburbs, are now looking more closely at the unit market.
It's just a natural progression, isn't it? You mentioned before, and I know you want to jump off Brizzy, but you said the feels change. Can you articulate that for the people that haven't been to Brisbane lately, or who are, you know, not familiar with Brisbane? Can you articulate what that means?
Yeah, look, I think through the lockdowns, as Melbourne has, or even Sydney has to a lesser extent, and you know, it's such a vague statement that it feels a lot more vibrant. But you go to places like Fortitude Valley, for example, and you go there on a Tuesday night, and the restaurants are full, and it's impossible to book anything, and you know, there's these restaurant precincts that are completely packed out. Hotels are in high demand. The Olympics has given people a lot of confidence. So, you know, I think I spoke at a property council event mid last year in Brisbane, and, you know, it's a developer audience, and, you know, people were talking a lot about the golden decade for Brisbane, and, you know, there was a very upbeat feel in that city about, you know, this city's finally, it's on the international map, and people know, you know, people in the US know we're a city and we're a growing city. And, you know, so I guess it was that. And then when you look at the data, you know, it's certainly showing up in rents. If you have a look at Brisbane house rents, have increased by about 20% since the start of the pandemic. So, you know, that's pretty sharp. You know, we talk about price growth at 20%, and that's high, but rental increases are, you know, at that level, they're alarming in many ways, because it does get very expensive for renters. But in terms of rental return, it does make it far more attractive. So I guess, you know, it's showing up in data, it's showing up in, you know, traffic, in terms of positivity amongst, you know, different groups of people. And you know, I think it's just such a rapid change that's taken over the city pretty much over the past, you know, 6 months. I mean, it's probably happened longer. I guess I haven't been to Brisbane for so long, but, you know, I think it felt very different to when I'd last been to Brisbane. I hadn't really experienced such positivity for so long there.
Let's be honest, it's the Victorians who got out early, who know that they're no longer a lockdown, and they're just seeing the value of the house that they bought, just at the shadows of the first part of the pandemic now gone up a significant amount. So really now it's just this, in this country, there's the people who own property and there's the people who don't, and two very different stories. Because I was reading what you put out recently around, you know, housing is making Australians very wealthy. The household wealth reached record highs of 14 billion on the back of significant increases in the value of these homes across the board. But it's a challenging story for people who aren't homeowners, and we often talk about first homeowners, but there's people who are trying to get into the market who have sold, thinking that they could buy in, and now they're sort of caught in between. So there definitely is two lanes of people in this country, isn't it? One with a big smile on their face, and others that are finding it really distressing.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we do often celebrate house price growth, but in reality, it's a lot of people who, as you said, are missing out. And it's not just first home buyers, as you stated, it's also upgraders. You know, it's quite difficult now if you own a small home and you want to get into a big family home. It's, you know, it's quite hard to find big family homes. They're quite expensive. You know, affordability, and I think it's also it is also an intergenerational issue that, you know, right now, and it's not just Australia, around the world, you know, COVID has sparked this asset price boom, which has hit housing most significantly. And we do now have a situation where it's very difficult for people to get into the market. If they can get into the market, they can't necessarily buy where they want to live. So, there's a lot of issues around planning controls and, terrible to say, but NIMBYism, like trying to build homes in desirable areas is very, very difficult. And so much so that it has become the subject of inquiry. We do have an affordability inquiry on at the moment, very focused on new homes and making sure that new homes are built in the right places. But also, I do think it will be an election issue. I don't think investors will be the target this time around. It was a poorly thought out strategy, I felt, by the Labor Party last election in targeting investors, because fundamentally investors own, it's probably 95% of rental properties in Australia. And if you push them out, who's going to provide that? So they kind of didn't have a backstop in terms of, a drop in rental properties. But I think this time around, possibly there's been a recognition, but, there's certainly a recognition that it's very, very expensive to buy in Australia. And you go to somewhere like Sydney, where early 80s, the average home was 4 times average income, and it's now sitting at about 15 times. So, I know interest rates are very different now, but it's still a pretty stark reminder that, it is different for first home buyers than it was for previous generations.
Nerida, you spoke about this intergenerational challenge that not only Australia is going through. I mean, I was listening to a particular podcast on the weekend, and I was staggered by the figure that I'm about to share with everyone. But the baby boomers in America hold $70 trillion worth of wealth that's intergenerational, that's going to pass on to their kids. So this is America, 70 trillion with a T in terms of that wealth that's going to pass on. Now, what I noticed through the pandemic, and what I'm interested to see that will come up hopefully in the census data when we start to see that data coming through, is again the number of people who bought second homes. So in the data, in the lending data, we saw that it was owner occupiers, and that's for private use. So effectively they might have their city house, but they also now have their lifestyle property as well. So coming back to your blog around, this whole idea of, how much household wealth is in there. I will be fascinated in terms of just how many people now own a second holiday home or lifestyle home compared to that. Have you seen any of that in your data, or is that sort of coming up in any of the dialogue that you're having with other economists or the market in general?
Yeah, I mean, anecdotally for sure. I mean, we obviously can't, it's kind of hard to track, but holiday homes are far more commonplace. We saw through the pandemic people not being able to travel. They had high savings rates. In Victoria, you could go to regional Victoria and have far less restrictions. People wanted to get out of town. They couldn't go far. So, we did see, and that flowed through to pricing. We saw it in Byron, and we saw it in Orange and Mornington Peninsula and Lawn, wherever Robe, everywhere you looked, if it was beachside and was pretty nice, you saw a big increase. The other thing you mentioned too is about second homes and baby boomers downsizing. And it is interesting. I mean, they are downsizing, but not in the way that I think people traditionally think of them downsizing. They're not like downsizing to a 2-bedroom apartment in Mossman from a 5-bedroom home. They're downsizing. Maybe they've got the 2-bedroom apartment in Mossman, but that's their city pad, and then they're buying in Southern Highlands and getting a big farm or some sort of lifestyle property. So yeah, there's definitely downsizing taking place. I mean, we're selling a project in Double Bay, and talking to the people on that project, they're all like, well, yeah, they're downsizers, but these aren't downsizer pricing.
That's from Double Bay.
Like downsizing to get a bargain. They're downsizing to get a beautiful apartment that's probably costing a similar price. So it's interesting to watch. It is interesting to watch because we've all been talking about people downsizing for so long, but I think for me certainly I saw it as a very different flow on to what seems to be happening.
Well, that intergenerational wealth is also occurring here. Like we know that, the data that was, I think it was Bernard Salt who was saying 2 years ago that 5,000 people a week were turning over 65 years of age. And that's why you need to wait, sort of 24 months before your caravan gets delivered. If you order it today, you're going to have to wait for that time to get your van. But that's intergenerational. That wealth is ultimately going to be transferred to the X Gen, Y generation. And so that whole idea of the haves and have-nots in property, those people are in obviously a lot stronger position to continue to build that legacy wealth through that family. And that's why it's so important that the whole affordability story and there's no easy solution for it. You and I will both know in the focus groups and the committees that we're on in terms of there is no easy solution to this. But in your view around that, what are some of the things you'd like to see happen that would free up supply or that would do some lifting in terms of bringing on more affordable housing to get those people who aren't in the market into the market at some point?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, there's no magic number one answer, and I think that's people want that. They're like, well, just chuck some money in it and we'll sort it out. Yeah. But there's not one answer. I think we know first home buyers love a government incentive. So you have a look at 2020, and we saw the highest level of first owner buyers in Victoria, WA, I think in ACT that we'd ever seen. So, you give them a home builder grant, you give them a state government grant, you give them, you power up their deposit to get them in the market, and they'll sort out the rest. They find the home, they'll find the loan, and they'll do pretty well. So definitely government money. That has dried up. Obviously, home builders, not dried up, but it could only be extended for so long. So that's been pulled back. So that's pulled back their activity. First home buyers don't like competing with investors. So, again, it's a market. We can't control that, so that's problematic. I think though, fundamentally, it does come down to housing supply. We know in markets that are well supplied for housing, who have good planning systems in place, we don't have such bad affordability problems. And again, it's not easy. You can't just say, all right, well, Turac's got a bit of extra land, let's knock down 7 houses and build 200 flat apartments, and this will solve things. So there's a lot of, I guess, recognition that people buy in certain places because they value the amenity and they value perhaps the lack of traffic or parking or whatever. So I think planning definitely has a role. Definitely government grants have a role. It was interesting. I was on ABC last week, and we were talking about the Singapore model. So the Singapore model is obviously one where government provides a lot of housing. They own 90% of the land. And the person that was on there is an economist from Sydney Uni, was saying, we should do it here, but it's hard, our government doesn't own much land. So they can't, Singapore owns 90% of the land. Our government owned a small fraction of that. So, we can't do that. And then we
did see the federal government release some of that military land, in Maribyrnong there. So anything that they do see that's above need, they are actually bringing that in to release more housing and more. So they're aware of it as well, but it's super challenging.
Yeah, and I mean, that's interesting in itself. I mean, the other issue, the thing that they do in Singapore is that, once you sell that to a first home buyer, it's not like that solves the problem, because there's going to be more first home buyers coming in behind them. So you can't, you save maybe that generation of first home buyers. You've used up your land, but, now you've got to kind of, well, where do I get this next sort of land for the next sort? So that's a challenge. And the other challenge too is that to solve that problem in Singapore, they have 99-year leases. So you own your home for 99 years. So perhaps you own it, you pass it to your kid, but then, that gets taken off them to redevelop and put into another first home buyer's pocket. So it's hard. So I think planning, I think government grants help. It's certainly COVID helped in that it did get people moving to regional areas and moving to cheaper areas. That certainly helps. And then a slower market, I think, again, the speed of the market has really spooked first home buyers. They like a slow market. They want to take their time. Again, they were very active in 2020 because things were kind of a little bit uncertain. But last year, it was quite alarming to see what was happening, I think, for a lot of people, and not just first home buyers, but even upgraders. If you sold a home, in June and were trying to buy back in September, you would have been so frightened about how fast things have moved. And I think that's that's the other challenge with fast markets. It just creates, problems for people in terms of making decisions.
Nerida, one of the criticisms of the campaign around the negative gearing abolishment with the Labor government was they didn't really consult with leaders in the field. So, some people will be listening to what you just said. There's some common sense ideas, not easy solved, but the important thing is it's thought provoking and it's well thought through. So you mentioned the affordability inquiry before. Are you getting an opportunity to have input there? If not, are they seeking suitably qualified counsel for that? What's your feedback there?
Yeah, I'm not involved. I'm involved a lot in the South East Queensland Housing Supply Panel. So I do talk to them. A lot of the focus though for that is definitely affordability, but also around, people, social housing, for example. So, I think that's the other thing. Governments do need to, fundamentally, they do need to support, everyone, but it's the most needy. They have to make sure that they do have roofs over their heads. So, so I think that's necessarily a focus. But yeah, the affordability inquiry, I mean, so I think a lot of people are criticising it. The main criticism is that it's very focused on housing supply. And, I think that's the right focus, but others don't. They think there's more of a role for more complicated schemes. I think, rent to buy is one, which I don't really like, but, some people like it. Another one is, you hear people talk about people who live in social housing, giving them the opportunity to buy that social housing at a reduced price. But, I think a lot of these schemes, they kind of work well short term, but they kind of come unstuck, several years down the track. And, that the one where the social housing was an interesting one, they did in the UK, and there was a lot of backlash because people were buying, in very prestigious suburbs in London at heavily reduced prices. And so there was this kind of, this fairness. There's always a fairness issue, isn't there? There's always like, well, I didn't have that opportunity, or that person did, I didn't, or, so I think there's always that problem when you make the scheme too complicated. There's always people that are going to lose out as a result.
Look, and I'll add to that in terms of we know that deposit is one of the biggest barriers, but I'm completely with you, Nerida. It is more, if you can bring more supply on, which in reality means more density, which means in reality means not in my backyard, there's going to have to be some ratio limits. Like even if you do some subtle changes on certain streets, where some streets it's just freestanding homes is all you can have. But if you then now put an announcement across all of Victoria that says 1% of those properties on that street can be duplexes, well, all of a sudden you start to make that incremental change. Whereas it's like how they do it is they say, right, that street there, we're going to make that where you can basically do an R20 or an R40 in WA terms, but you can build 2 on that, or a maximum of 3 on that, or a maximum of 4 for the whole street. And then the whole street gets changed, and all of a sudden there's no parking. Whereas again, if you think about how you can, think sensibly about each street, then you'll know what your ratios would be on each street. And that's potentially one way in which you can move the dial slowly, as opposed to, as you say, knock down 7 Turek mansions and build 450 apartments. It's never going to get up. It's going to go to VCAT and never have a chance in hell of actually being built because it's not in my backyard. So those types of things are important. There's a new company out called Own Home that are also looking at what I would consider as a reasonable rent to buy model. So we'll hopefully get them on the podcast in the next month or two. But that's an example where it's a legitimate, as opposed to some of those rent to buy, sort of homes. Those scenarios were heavily weighted in the vendor's favour. And unfortunately, if someone missed a payment, then all of a sudden, they're kicked out of the property. So I think there's some good opportunity there as well. As we close out the sort of affordability story, is there anything else that comes to mind for you that you would sort of also say might be something we want to consider?
Yeah, I suppose there's always access to finance, but that's one that does hit first home buyers very easily. So I know a lot of people seem to think interest rates are there just to control the housing market, but you can't really fiddle with them and just impact housing and then not the rest of the economy. And then we know that first any restrictions to finance around serviceability are going to hit first home buyers most, because they are first home. They've they don't have high incomes typically. So I think, I don't think that's the answer. I think, again, some people feel that it is, but yeah, it definitely comes down to supply.
And Nerida, you've mentioned in 1988, homes made up just over half of our total wealth. Now that has increased to 63%. Part of that 1,900 billion increase since the beginning of the pandemic has also come with an increase in debt, right, at 145 billion. So as a percentage of the increase, it's low. But for those people with the debt, that's the challenging bit, because there's a lot of people that have got homes fully paid off and those fully hocked and somewhere in between. So you mentioned, you hinted at it before, but the narrative now is around rate rises, which we haven't had for a little while. What is your feedback around the rate rise? And I'd love for you to give the reference to the 2 to 3% inflation bandwidth as well, and sort of explain to people who don't quite understand that sort of in layman's terms, so we can get that message to land. But let's start with interest rates. What's your narrative around interest rates for 2022?
Look, I think it is too early to tell at this point. And so the Reserve Bank basically target inflation in setting interest rates. So they try to keep inflation between 2 and 3%. So last quarter's inflation came in at 3.5, previous came in at 3. We knew we would see high inflation at this point. You know, it's not like anyone's looking at it and going, oh my goodness, how did that happen? You know, we knew it would happen. And we knew it would happen because, you know, like an old car, you know, the economy can't just start up suddenly. Like we're all ready to go out and spend again, but, you know, it's taking time. There's still a lot of problems. You know, we've still got COVID outbreaks. You know, there's capacity issues. Yeah, there's certainly capacity issues. I mean, you try and eat out in any city at the moment, there's struggling for staff, build a home, struggling for staff. So definitely capacity issues. We have supply chains which are blocked, so very hard to get anything in from overseas. We've also got high oil prices. Again, that's out of our control. We can't do anything. So, you know, we're not a big enough player in global oil markets to make any impact on that. So at this point, I don't feel it will happen, but if it did happen, I mean, it won't fix supply chains. It won't fix oil prices. What it will do, it'll slow down the economy and let it time for the economy to catch up. So, you know, I suppose that would be fundamentally the reason that the Reserve Bank does move sooner than expected. There's even a question around whether we will get to very, very high interest rates. I mean, there is the US now is running at about 7%. So, you know, that's and they haven't moved yet on rates. They'll have to move, but, you know, we're not even wildly out of the 2 to 3% band. So, you know, I guess that's the other point. So at this point, you know, I don't think we'll see an interest rate rise this year. I could be totally wrong, but I think what we do need to keep in mind is that the days of low interest rates are over. If you have a home loan and you've got a lot of debt, be mindful that things are going to change. You know, get your finances in order, start to kind of plan for an increase in payments, perhaps pay down your mortgage a little bit more. You know, I think so at a personal level, I think people do need to get ready and just, you know, not assume that rates will remain this low forever.
Now, Nerida, yes, I mean, I was fascinated by Governor Lowe's speech at the press club last week, because I, like you know, when I was doing my analysis for my economic update that I do each month, I was like, I can make a case for and I can make a case against a rate rise. So I think I'm with you in terms of there's a real uncertainty there. And I think the Governor Lowe, to his credit, basically come out and says, you know what, we're not sure yet, that we don't have the read on which direction it's going. But what I also was really comforted by was his effort to go after wage increases and real wage increases. So he's committed to that cause, which is obviously going to result with, you know, effectively an unemployment rate with a 3 in front of it. That's almost, you know, a given over the course, as long as there's no more lockdowns or new, you know, variants coming in that stops us from going out. So we've got record levels of job offers out there. We've got, you know, mass shortages in terms of available people to work. So that is going to be the case the first time in 50 years. But I still love his conviction to that fact that let's just see where this goes. So, you know, their forecast is now for inflation to peak at 3.75%, I think, in the last economic update on Friday. So let's do this. And I quite like that story, because ultimately he does know that supply chains and the demand side and supply side variables will lift at some point, and he's hoping that he can get the genie back in the bottle, the inflation genie back in the bottle. Now that bodes well for a pretty okay property market, because that's obviously the connection for us is rates are going to rise at some point. But what does that mean for property prices this year across the board? We did, Bryce led with, a rising tide lifting all ships. Where do you see property markets? Do you see a story of markets within markets this year? And we just can't see that level of lift that we saw in the last 12 months because of the pending interest rate rises that will come. We are at emergency level interest rates. So what's your view there?
Yeah, I think, without a doubt, we won't see the level of growth this year that we saw last year. And it comes back to the uncertainty. We've got restrictions to finance that came in last year. We've got talk of an interest rate rise, which can be as spooky to people as an actual interest rate rise. And then there's just a shift of, between buyer expectations and seller expectations that, buyers are kind of a little bit more hesitant now. We can see it in days on market. We can, it's not really showing up that much in pricing yet, but, anecdotally, you talk to people in Sydney and Melbourne, they're like, oh, it's getting a bit expensive. Or, I'm not sure it's going to keep going. So definitely a slowdown this year. I think then Sydney and Melbourne probably will slow the most. And, and I think that because they are the, two of the more expensive locations and very sensitive to interest rate talk. And then you've got demographic factors which could offset some of the poorer kind of demand conditions, such as the shift north, international migration starting up. Canberra is going gangbusters because, they just need more public servants. We've got Adelaide, which is still so cheap, and so a lot of investors seem to be flocking to Adelaide at the moment. And WA, who knows, it'll depend on if they open their borders or not. We know iron ore's come back, it was going down and starting to come back again. And then Darwin seems to be doing really well at the moment because gas is so high in demand. So, I think, I think there's those offsetting factors of interest rates are problematic, access to finance will become increasingly problematic, but international borders are opening. We've got a redistribution of population, and so that will change things once we look at a more micro level of markets.
Now, there's one market in there that we haven't mentioned from a capital city point of view, and that is Hobart. We were having a bit of a chat off air about this one, but can you share your observation of that market, please?
Yeah, Hobart has been incredible. It's now, it's the fourth most expensive capital city. So it goes Sydney, Canberra now, Melbourne, then Hobart. So it was so cheap. I think anyone who is familiar with that market is pretty familiar with it. And if you'd bought there 5 years ago, you would have not only had incredible capital growth, you would have had incredible rental growth. So, it's been one of those rare markets that, you don't talk about high yield and talk about high capital growth now, hardly ever, but that's been a market you have been able to talk about. I think, it is getting expensive. I suppose, one of the biggest challenges there has been that the local economy, it's changed, but it's still, people aren't super wealthy. So, that there's an affordability problem. Rents have increased so much that there's now a homelessness problem. So, there's some challenges there. There's been a lot of money coming from Victoria. And we know that when Victorians look at Hobart, they recalibrate the market to be more like Melbourne. We know that flow happens everywhere. As soon as, people come out of Sydney and look at a market, they compare it to Sydney and prices go up. So yeah, I think it's done well through the pandemic. I didn't think it would. I thought it would probably slow more given that the borders were blocked and international students weren't there and tourism wasn't there. It kept going, but I think you had some interesting observations on supply, because that's obviously been something that has elevated prices. Is that it has been a relatively low supply market. Yeah,
there's the government has been working very, very hard in getting some more properties built. And so there are thousands of properties that are literally going to come into that market. Now, interestingly enough, since that statement, I was reading one of their sort of more volume builders has gone into liquidation because of the supply shortages of the material. So when they've done all these fixed building price contracts, so that could be a savior for that market in terms of not bringing that supply on. But I just, from a fundamentals point of view, I only need to look at what Perth did when it went, that got to number 2, I think, when it had its big run in 13, 14, and then gave up, 25% of its value after that time. I see...
And went flat for a while.
Yeah, and then went dormant. I mean, that's obviously been our view of these secondary markets and tertiary markets, because we've also got to remember Hobart, I think in terms of population size, is the 14th or 15th biggest centre in Australia. So it's not even remotely in the top 10. And it's, we're only talking, I'm guessing here, I think if I remember correctly, it's about 360,000 is around the population of that. Please, any of our community reach.
About 500,000 for Tasmania.
It's 500,000
total,
for Tasmania as a whole, but what about Hobart as a city? That's
no, you'd be right.
So I think it's about that. So I look at the wages and the, basically the income to servicing ratios of servicing debt down there. And I just feel that this has been obviously, interstate money flowing in, as you're saying. And so once that supply story finds equilibrium, and the investors aren't necessarily getting the returns there, and their money's just sitting there, I just see a supply, a demand supply equation that moves in the other direction, and I see it giving back some of its value. So that's just an observation I've got. But I also, coming back to your story about the one thing that will happen this year is the rising tide that we can almost basically, take to the bank, is rents across the country will grow. I just think that's a given because of exactly the record numbers of low vacancy rates. That is everywhere, and now the borders are opening internationally. I can't see how rents could go down right across the market, but I do see that there's going to be markets within markets like Hobart, maybe Melbourne too. We saw a strong supply spurt coming on at the end of last year. Buyers' expectations, sellers' expectations. Those things are going to play out, future interest rates. But it's one of the more difficult markets to pick this year. Last year was pretty easy to pick. The year before, when the pandemic hit, we were still quite bullish on property story. We were probably one of the only ones who were sitting back saying, we don't think it is be as bad as what people were saying. But prior to that, this is one of those years. I said to Bryce earlier when we caught up at the start of the year, I said, it's just not as clear cut this year as the rising tide lifting all ships. And I just can't see the growth rates of double digits that we've seen in the past. And so that's my view.
Yeah, definitely a calmer market, which I think is probably welcomed by many people.
It's a good thing. It's a sustainable thing. We've got over exuberance that has got us to where we are in some markets right now. And probably that's one of my sort of final questions for you, because I think we've done the around the grounds really well. But this whole idea of moving to the regions and spreading your wings and work lifestyle balances that we're seeing, there is some talk from some areas, and I'm probably sitting slightly on this side about returning to the long-term mean. And that is that, once we get out the other side of a pandemic, it becomes an endemic. And then ultimately people are sort of saying, that second property that I did buy for lifestyle, now my life's getting busier back in my home. So now I don't need that property anymore. So, will those regional markets start to see in 3 to 5 years a lift in supply, which potentially puts pressure on values? Have you got any views around, that is this here to stay in terms of the way in which we're going to live out our lives for the next 5, 10, 15 years post-pandemic?
Yeah, I do. I guess it depends on which regional area. And you look at, I think I mentioned it before, but you look at Geelong, you look at Illawarra, prior to the pandemic, they were already doing very well, and prices were lifting and people were moving there, and they were becoming extensions of bigger capital cities. So that will continue. I've got no doubt Illawarra is very expensive now, and that's not going back to cheap Wollongong anymore. So Geelong is not going back to cheap Geelong again. I think those days are certainly over. And then you look at northern New South Wales, and you look at somewhere like the Richmond Tweed area. I think that's being supported by a very strong demographic shift up there at the moment. And I can certainly see it where I live. Places like the northern beaches of Sydney, people are just sick of the prices, sick of the traffic. They've got jobs. Maybe they're not even office jobs. They might be teachers, or they might be physios, whatever, and they're taking the opportunity to get out of Sydney and move up north. So I think that northern shift, I don't think will change. I think the heat will probably come out of some areas. I think, like you said, holiday homes, people might sell up. They probably might want to fund an overseas trip now that they can get out of town. So, I think possibly some of those more, more secondary beachside locations will probably take a hit. But, I think the days of a very cheap beachside property is, that's over. I can't, there'd be places, of course, but you can't go to the Mornington Peninsula, and you won't be able to go back to the Mornington Peninsula now and buy a cheap fibro shack for, a bit of change. It's, that's like multi-millions now. So, I think that shift has happened, but, again, heat's coming out of the market. So, that will calm things down. A few people will pull back. They might move back to the city. There is a sense of normalcy that is coming back, and that will, get things a little bit more on an even keel.
Nerida, my final one for you. You're at Ray White now. They love listings. You were at REA. They love listing listings. So what if you look at the data, it looks like total listings nationally is lower over the last 5 years, but just in the last 28 days, it looks like it's probably just a little bit above average for January. So what are you seeing? What are you expecting? And I guess it's my last crystal ball for you for this conversation today.
Yeah, we look at listing authorities. So listing authorities is if you decide to sell your home through Ray White, you tell Ray White, you sign them up. And so there's a lag between that point and which it then goes on the public. So I think, we don't have an exact time frame of that. It just depends on the agent. But what we're seeing with listing authorities, we have seen Melbourne and Sydney a bit more hesitancy amongst sellers. So it's not bombing or anything. It's just a little bit pushing down compared to what we saw in 2019, 2020, 2021. If we have a look at Brisbane, people are selling. There's just there's a lot of people taking advantage of market conditions. Even our Brian White, he's the founder of the current generation of the business, and he sold up in Brisbane, so he certainly, had the big family home where his kids grew up and sold that. So, so I think, Brisbane, lots of people are, taking advantage and selling. Melbourne and Sydney, still, a bit of hesitancy amongst sellers, but, and I think that will probably be what we'll see this year. It's just not going to be a mass sell-off. It's not going to be people paying crazy prices. It's just going to be kind of this more even balance between what buyers are wanting and what sellers are wanting as well.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess the more stock, the more equilibrium we get to quickly, and then all of a sudden more transactions being fulfilled on both sides is a good thing for everyone to keep it calm, as you talked about. But Nerida, it is always a pleasure to have you on the Property Couch. Your insights are always amazing. We thank you for taking the time at the beginning of the year to set us up with your insights as to what you see, and we look forward to having you on the couch at some stage later on in the year.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
Oh, Ben, how good is that? I just love chatting with Nerida. She is an exception. We've spent many hours with Nerida. She's an exceptionally bright, talented woman, but she just makes it sound so simple and easy to understand, doesn't she?
We just got, and I could talk to Nerida all day. I was ready to sort of say, hey, come on, guys, let's take the afternoon off. I'm going to go and make another cup of tea. I'm going to come back here and let's just chew the fat on the property market. Because we didn't just do the traditional outlook. We looked at affordability.
Yep.
We had a different view on it. And I quite like that because, that's where you get some insights around critical thinking and iron sharpening iron, and you get a sense of basically what's happening on the market. And there's no better economists in terms of who's out there than Nerida, sort of looking at and specialising in the residential space. So I love every time I get a chance to talk to Nerida. So thank you very much, Nerida, for coming on.
Big friend of the Property Couch, always having her on. We'll have her on again later in the year. Now, just forgive us, Ben, there was 1 or 2 or 3 times there was a little lag in the internet.
Yes.
Because we're over the interweb during that interview. So forgive us there was a couple of times when the first 2 or 3 seconds were cut off. Nerida's answer, but you got the gist of it in the end on what she was saying. But Nerida, we super appreciate you, and thank you for coming on to the Property Couch podcast. Hey, my life hack today, mate, is as you know, I'm doing a reno at the moment.
You are,
and one of the tips I got, and I put it into practice, and it was wonderful. Was in the planning stage, I got the plumber, the tiler, and the chippy all in the same room at the same time because we're remodeling the bathroom ensuite, those sorts of things.
Yep.
And that simple tip alone from a very experienced renovator. It was actually the Three Birds renovators, Ben, and it's also something that Jane Slack-Smith suggests.
Love it.
Get them in the same room, not to start the job, but just say this is what's going on. And I'll tell you what, it saved my bacon so much. Because Ben, you've done it yourself a number of times. It's death by 1,000 decisions anytime you're doing anything like this. And it's those decisions that when they are talking to each other, they did 85% of the problem solving around a couple of things that we needed to change in the run. So, and
same page, understand outcome, talk amongst ourselves, get a line of sight, plan of attack.
And then they just have that second language where they just and which is funny. And I shouldn't say it, but
I'll inset that if you cut that groove and render that and put sounds like you guys have got this sorted.
I used to think I was sharp on maths, right? But once you get them with the tape measure and the mills, and they're doing algorithms that just blow my socks off. But anyway, for the experienced renovators listening to this, they go, "Yep, no problem, done that." For those of you contemplating, because I'm thinking we double back to the show we did late last year, Ben, where we're saying, "How do you get into the market? You've got to put a bit of sweat equity and all those sorts of things."
Yeah.
Get the core tradies in the same room very early on the project, walk them through, showing what you're doing. Then they get to chat and do it. Problem solve 85% of the problems. You're still going to have a few decisions, which there's been plenty of those, but that'll help you. So that's my life hack today. Ben, what's making property news, please?
Oh, back for 2022. Maybe we'll just do one a month. I don't know. We'll see how it goes because, obviously it takes me a lot of time and effort to pull these stories together. Anyway, I'm going to get serious now.
Oh,
ready?
Yeah, I am.
Rent theft, Bryce.
Oh,
there is.
Have you been pinching people's pockets?
There is a government in Australia.
Okay.
That lives north in the northern side of Australia, who are stealing rent from the owners of investment properties in Queensland, Bryce.
Oh wow, too much sun.
And you know what at the end of the Treasury update and just before Christmas, how they basically, when they've got a difficult announcement to make, these premiers and these state governments, it's called bringing out the trash. And they bring the trash out late on a Friday night so it doesn't get any coverage.
Yes.
Well, they announced rent theft on the 16th of December, I think it was, when no one was paying attention. They brought out the trash. Now, of course, Bryce, they're not calling it rent theft. They're calling it...
What are they calling it?
They're calling it, Bryce, a tax loophole, a land tax loophole that's going to help, ready for the spin, that's going to help tackling housing affordability.
Oh, wow. That's the latest. Okay.
Right. So here's their tremendously clever idea. What they are going to do is they are going to tax at a higher land tax rate investors who own properties in other states or territories. Let that land. So the threshold that you were entitled to in each state or territory, and let me just explain this, Bryce. No other state or territory does this, but apparently it's a tax loophole. But apparently no one else knows about that it's a tax loophole because no other state or territory does it. But it ultimately means, in theory, that they are going to account for the land value of what you own in other states and territories. Now, remember, Bryce, land tax and property is a state-based tax. So they are going to effectively double tax you because anyone who's outside of Queensland is going to be double taxed by the Queensland government. I'm making it very clear it's the Queensland government is their proposal. Now, we're going to talk more about this, but in theory, they're making the threshold goes to zero if you own property in another state or territory. And that basically means that they're going to ratchet up the land tax that you pay in Queensland. Now, we're going to take a deeper dive in this. So we're going to go to our great friend, the REIQ.
Antonia will have a thing to say about that.
She's already said a few things in the meeting, but it just seems to have not got traction. So obviously this is a property investment podcast, Bryce. So this is exactly the type of thing that we know is going to happen in terms of, I love the comment that she talks about here in terms of we're getting a little bit sick and tired where property investors are used as a money pit. And so that's why I'm calling it rent theft as opposed to wage theft that you also potentially hear out in the marketplace when people aren't paying the right wages. Well, they're going to steal our rent and then put it into their coffers. And so I think it's not on, but we're going to take a deeper dive in the next couple of weeks when we get Antonia onto the show, and we'll explain it more. And then we will also give you what actions we would like you to take to voice your disapproval of such a silly idea. Because ultimately, what did we hear from Nerida today, Bryce? We heard that rental accommodation is very expensive and effectively there's low vacancy rates. Now, if the government's going to tax us by another couple of $1,000s a year in Queensland, who's going to pay for that? So they're talking about helping with housing affordability and trying to get people in the market. Well, if those rents go up in Queensland, a little bit harder to save for a deposit, or you lose all of the investment dollars that are going in there to provide property investment stock, i.e. rental stock, for the swathe of people that are coming up to Queensland. Not a well thought out strategy. And I put it in the dumb bucket, to be honest with you. So I want to talk more about that. But that is not only what's making property news, Bryce, but it's also getting a little bit of smoke out the ears. I'm getting a little bit of smoke out the ears as well.
Oh, mate, if only this was visual and not audio, everyone could see that, but I can see it from here, mate. But fair call. We'll definitely be trying to...
We are going to take that up as a crusade.
Chase that down, because we know Antonia loves a good chase down too when she did the previous campaign.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we got so much done back in the days when they... when obviously COVID was in place and they were talking about, some of those changes. So we're going to do hopefully the same thing. We can hopefully get some support and we'll lead, we'll basically take their lead in terms of what they want us to do, and we'll share that with the community.
There we go. Massive show to start off after our summer series. Thanks again, Nerida. Folks, leave us a review. You get a chance to win, start and build.
Yeah, if you want to register to use the Money Smart setup and get some helping hand,
propertycouch.com.au/Money Smarts help. Let us know if you want to help. But until next week, Ben.
But until next week, Bryce, knowledge is empowering, but only if you act.
Very well said, mate. See you next week, folks.
Hey guys, Bryce here again. Just want to catch you before you go and let you know, if you're new to our community, there are a lot of episodes to catch up on, but it's really important that you start from the very beginning at episode number 1. Because episode 1 through to 20 share all of the foundational pillars and frameworks that you need to know to get the best out of listening to this podcast. So I'd recommend that you start there, and the little tip is to maybe start on 1.5 speed. Now, for those of you that are time poor and don't have time to go back from the beginning, don't worry, we've got you covered as well, because we've created a binge guide that goes through all of the details and makes it easy for you to read and get up to speed very, very quickly. So if you go to thepropertycouch.com.au/fast track, you will be able to download that binge guide and you will be up to speed in no time. And whilst you're there, I've got a few extra goodies for you, because we have our top 5 frameworks that you'll learn on this podcast, as well as the Make Money Simple Again ebook, which will help you with the foundations of basic money management, so you'll have everything you need to succeed in building your own lifestyle design and getting the best out of this podcast. Now, just a reminder that anything that we cover on this podcast is not considered financial advice. We certainly recommend that you get your unique circumstances looked at by your individual advisor, and everything we talk about is just general in nature. To thepropertycouch.com.au/fast track, and you can go and get all those goodies and catch up right away.